I'd like to say that.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines coming out of the hour. Thailand says 4 soldiers are killed in renewed clashes with Cambodia at the disputed border, bringing the death toll to 14 since fighting began this week. The Prime Minister vows to continue military actions despite a US claim that a ceasefire has been agreed. President Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff travels to Germany to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders for talks on ending the war in Ukraine. The Trump administration pushes for a peace deal by Christmas, though recent talks with Ukraine and Russia show little sign of a breakthrough. Devastating floods and landslides in Indonesia kill more than 1,000 people, with the worst damage in Sumatra, rescuers say. Authorities report 1,003 dead and over 200 missing as emergency teams struggle to reach affected areas. 2 people are killed and others injured after a Ukrainian drone strike hit a residential building in the Russian city of Saratov, regional officials have said. The governor says the overnight attack caused casualties and damage, with no immediate details on the extent of injuries. Over the border, Ukraine says Russia uses drones and missiles to strike 2 ports, damaging 3 Turkish-owned vessels, including a ship carrying food supplies. The attack follows Moscow's pledge to retaliate for Kiev's maritime drone strikes on Russian tankers. The Philippine Coast Guard says 3 Filipino fishermen are wounded and 2 boats damaged after Chinese Coast Guard ships fire water cannons at a disputed South China Sea shoal. Officials say multiple Filipino vessels are blocked and anchor lines cut near Sabina Shoal, putting crews at risk. A storm sweeps across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 14 people and injuring others, according to Gaza's Interior Ministry. Officials say strong winds, heavy rain and collapsing structures hit families already displaced by Israel's assault. Iranian authorities detain 18 crew members of a foreign tanker seized in the Gulf of Oman, saying it carries 6 million litres of smuggled fuel. State media reports the detained includes the captain with crew members from India, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. We start in Europe, and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says that he intends to discuss his Ukraine-Russia peace initiative with US President Donald Trump following recent talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Erdogan made his proposal during a meeting with Putin in Turkmenistan focused on a limited ceasefire targeting energy facilities and ports as a potential first step towards a broader settlement. The Turkish president also reiterated his offer for Istanbul to serve as the venue for a wider range of peace negotiations. Erdogan and Putin met on the margins of the International Peace and Trust Forum in Turkmenistan's capital and discussed the bilateral ties and comprehensive peace efforts regarding the Moscow-Kyiv war. Joining us now is Ben Aries. He's a Russian journalist. He joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. Erdogan here, he's saying that he hopes to discuss a Ukraine peace plan with Trump after meeting Vladimir Putin last week. Is Turkey positioning itself as a mediator here or as Moscow's preferred channel to Washington? And of course, today in Odessa's port, 3 Turkish vessels were hit by this drones. How might this affect this relationship?
Absolutely. Turkey's played a key role in this conflict as a mediator. It has good relationships with Russia. It's refused to get on board with the sanctions regime in general and has been a major entry port for goods that used to go directly into Moscow. Now they're being channeled through Turkey. And at the same time, it's a NATO member. It has relations, reasonably good relations with the rest of Europe and the States. And a lot of the key deals, peace deals, agreements that have been struck during the war have happened in Istanbul, starting with the failed peace talks in April 2022 and the successful Black Sea grain deal, which allowed Ukraine to restart its grain exports. And Erdogan, he sees Putin regularly. He's offering to mediate between the two sides, and he's actually in a very good position to do that. But at the same time, like, Turkey's getting drawn into this war in so much as the Black Sea is very key for Turkey. A lot of its trade goes through there. And recently, both the Russians and the Ukrainians have started to strike oil tankers that are sailing through the Black Sea, affecting Turkey directly. And the incident you just mentioned was that Putin promised not to interfere with Black Sea shipping. Nevertheless, at the weekend, struck 3 Turkish oil tankers that were imports in Ukraine in order to prevent supplies of fuel reaching Ukraine as one of his war goals. And so there's a tension there, definitely. And that only motivates Erdogan even more to actually play a real role in bringing this war to an end, because it's affecting Turkey's economy, Turkey's security.
Yes, and Ben, of course, another huge diplomatic update today. Steve Witkoff is in Berlin to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders for a latest round of high-level talks. Ukraine and Europe are demanding these US security guarantees before any potential territorial concessions. Do you think Trump is likely to offer that, or push Europe to shoulder that burden?
It's already gone much further than I ever could have hoped for, in so much as that within the original 28-point plan, which is now 27 points, the US said explicitly that it was going to offer some sort of security guarantee. And then we saw a draft version of the leaked version of the American proposal, and that is NATO Article 5-like guarantees. It's a 10-year deal that also commits the US to possibly coming in with troops on the ground in Ukraine should Russia really invade once there's a peace deal. And that's more than anybody's offered. Again, there were comments coming out of the White House. They were saying, look, we're not going to offer a blank check, but in the form of Article 5 NATO, but we are going to do a quote-unquote real deal. And that's all about providing military support. So that's what Ukraine needs. That's what Zelensky has been demanding since the beginning. And ironically, the EU has talked about security deals, but it doesn't include that key military component. There's no collective military security coming from the EU. And Zelensky cannot do a peace deal without a real security deal, because he's thinking about protecting the sovereignty of the country after the war is over and ensuring that Russia doesn't come back, put troops on the border again, pressure it, threaten to invade. And if he has the backing of his Western allies, particularly the States, with a military commitment, then Russia will not invade for a second time, because that means Third World War. And so this is very encouraging. As for the US booting it off to the EU, I think it's the other way around. The US has actually stood up and made a commitment, and the EU is still dithering. And
Ben, Trump has proposed this free economic zone in the eastern Donbass region. Is this a pragmatic compromise or a de facto acceptance here of frozen conflict?
Well, what's going on is the Donbass, who owns it and who has sovereignty over it, is a Putin must-have. And the issue is that Zelensky has refused to give up any territory at all. And so they're coming up now with various versions of how they can fudge that. So one suggestion was to set up a Korean-style DMZ, demilitarized zone, which excludes all of the troops, particularly Russian, including Ukrainian, would have to leave, which is a Putin demand. But it leaves the sovereignty over that region, sort of fudged up in the air. It's not clear. And that's not gone down particularly well. It's in play. And this free economic zone is basically another version of the same thing. It's like, how do you get all the troops out of that region? And at the same time, for the Ukrainian side, they don't want to concede that it's Russian sovereign, but they will maybe concede it's de facto controlled by Russia. And Putin, on his side, is insisting that it's sovereign, but trying to find some formula where he's going to say, okay, that's close enough. And this free economic zone is the latest is offer. But this whole negotiation for peace now turns on those two questions, on the security guarantee and the territories, and how they're, what happens to them after the ceasefire.
Ben Iris, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you on the programme, and thank you for taking the time. We now move over for our next update from Southeast Asia, and Thailand has denied US President Donald Trump's claim that a truce with Cambodia was agreed during a recent phone call as fighting along the border entered its 6th day. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has said that she has urged President Trump to ask Cambodia to halt hostilities, saying that Thailand was not the aggressor and had a duty to protect its sovereignty and its people. She added that Trump was concerned about the fighting and warned both sides to return to a ceasefire, describing the call as taking place in a good atmosphere. The Thai leader also said that she did not believe Washington could link the conflict to trade tariffs. However, Thailand's Foreign Minister Sihac Phumthepsaikul said Trump's public remarks suggesting a truce had been reached did not reflect an accurate understanding of the situation on the ground. Let's take a listen in.
We're concerned because some of the points in his tweet doesn't, in our view, doesn't reflect an accurate understanding of the situation, and some of the points are inconsistent with the facts. Perhaps President Trump, the source of information, had deliberately distorted the facts. We regret and we're disappointed that some of the points made by President Trump has bearing upon the feeling of the Thai people, Thailand, because we consider ourselves, we are proud, in fact, and to be the oldest treaty ally of the United States.
Residents near the Thai-Cambodian border report that clashes have continued despite the phone call, underscoring the fragile security situation and the lack of a confirmed ceasefire between the two neighbours. Apologies, there was an error in the read. The Thai Prime Minister is Onortin Shanvirakul. Okay, joining us now is Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, pleasure to have you on the programme. This fighting entering its 6th day and a denial from Thai leadership that fighting will be stopped. Its Prime Minister says that President Trump is unlikely to link these conflicts to these trade tariffs. Does that reflect greater confidence here in dealing with the White House?
It might be more for domestic consumption within Thailand, especially now that Parliament has just been dissolved and an election is upcoming. So the ruling party certainly wants to maintain its leadership of government, and they have to confront public anger. And just like in Cambodia, there's public anger at the Thais, and in Thailand, there's public anger at the Cambodians. But we have to keep in mind that there will, just like a few months ago when this first flared up, there will be tremendous pressure both from the United States as well as from other ASEAN members, including the outgoing chairman Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia, who was very involved earlier this year in bringing about a ceasefire. He's involved at the moment, and President Trump specifically mentioned Anwar Ibrahim's role in this. And then the incoming chairman of ASEAN, President Marcos of the Philippines, will probably be involved as well. And then also China is a stakeholder, and they'll certainly be putting pressure on both sides as well. So I don't think that Thailand or Cambodia is immune from U.S. pressure, and U.S. pressure will be a significant factor here. Granted, the foreign minister's words were unusually direct in its criticism or refuting what the U.S. Has said, and we don't see that a lot around the world, actually. But I would, again, I think that Thailand and Cambodia are going to be under significant pressure from the U.S. To bring this to a very quick halt.
Yeah, and Ross, Thai leaders say and insist that they are not the aggressors, yet residents say fighting continues. Is this situation slipping beyond political control?
It remains to be seen. Of course, nobody wants to see these two neighbors engaged in a hot war. The scope at the moment, however tragic and disruptive it is for the civilians who are affected, the scope remains relatively small at the moment. So I think it's fair to say that the militaries are still responding to the civilian leadership. That being said, neither side wants to back down or be seen as having admitted defeat, which also makes it difficult to achieve a ceasefire unless they just go back to the status quo, which is kind of what President Trump and Prime Minister Anwar had been seeking throughout the last few months anyway. So the way out probably would be to go back to the status quo before fighting flared up. But again, neither side wants to be seen as having given something up. And that also factors into how quickly a ceasefire could be arranged.
Ross, a lot of analysts say that the root issues of this conflict are not being addressed. It is, after all, been a decades-long dispute. What's stopping that from happening? What's stopping these deep-rooted territorial issues and others from being addressed? Do you think the United States isn't taking this conflict serious enough?
To be fair to the U.S., I think the Trump administration has been pretty involved ever since fighting began earlier this year, whether that's Secretary Rubio, the frontline diplomats, or President Trump himself. But you're correct. This is a dispute over a relatively small amount of territory, but it is a dispute with a very long history. That being said, the ties between the two countries, commercial, cultural, are very, very strong. For example, it's been well reported how many Cambodians were working in Thailand before the fighting began, and many of them felt they had to leave Thailand because it was no longer safe to be a Cambodian working in Thailand. So the countries actually have, other than this dispute, a generally strong relationship in recent decades after the end of the Cold War. And despite many changes of governments in Thailand over the last few decades, Cambodia in that sense has benefited, despite criticisms of how it conducts its elections, but they basically have had two leaders for the past 40 years, so that's lent some stability to how Cambodia conducts its foreign policy and specifically its relationship with Thailand. So other than this dispute, generally these are two neighbors that have gotten along well.
Yes, Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we have further updates coming out of the Indo-Pacific, but of course on NewsX World we will continue to cover the Thai-Cambodia conflict as things develop. We now move on, and the Philippine Coast Guard says that 3 Filipino fishermen had been wounded and 2 fishing vessels suffered significant damage when Chinese Coast Guard's ships fired water cannons in a disputed South China Sea shoal. Video released by the Philippine Coast Guard showed Chinese Coast Guard boats surrounding and spraying water onto a Filipino fishing boat. China's embassy in Manila has not immediately responded to a request for comment outside office hours. Although China's Coast Guard says it has driven away multiple Philippine vessels and taken control measures. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, a waterway carrying more than $3 trillion of annual commerce. The areas, it claims, cut into the exclusive economic zones of Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines and Vietnam. Ross Feingold joins us once again. The Philippines says these fishermen were injured and boats damaged by this water cannon. Do you think Beijing here is testing the limits of Philippine security, the security around the South China Sea area? And How would you describe this action? It's not very frequent that people are actually injured by China driving away boats out of the South China Sea.
Physical injury to sailors might not be as frequent, but these incidents are very frequent where ships from the two sides are coming close together. Sometimes there's ramming. The Philippine side typically will say the fault is of the Chinese side for encroaching on Filipino waters, and the Chinese side will say the opposite. There's back and forth allegations about the seamanship of the captains of the respective vessels as well, but this is just the latest in a large number of similar incidents between the two sides, and it doesn't seem like there's really a way out. They have this competing sovereignty claim. The Philippines is broadly supported by many of its neighbors and many countries in the international community. There's very few people or governments in this region, even if they don't want to challenge China and they want to maintain a good relationship with China, very few people are saying, well, China's correct and the Philippines is wrong. And then the Philippines, of course, has its relationship with the United States. They're treaty allies, and the Philippines' military relationship with Japan and Australia is becoming closer as well. What will be really interesting to watch here is the U.S. reaction. Now, the U.S. has been accused of a less than enthusiastic reaction in support of Japan over the last 4 or 5 weeks in the dispute between China and Japan after Prime Minister Takaichi's comments about Taiwan. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of statements of support for the Philippines are made by U.S. government spokespeople.
Ross, of course, as you've said, this is a repeated instance. China, of course, sees the whole South China Sea as its own, and using this technique of these water cannons and driving boats out of the internationally recognized international waters pretty frequently. However, what point does this non-lethal force become a clear act of aggression under international law?
It's something that's totally open to interpretation. Just like any legal question, you could have 10 lawyers and you're going to get 10 different opinions. So, many people will say that, well, despite what international law might say, might make right here, as unfortunate as that is. And the reality is that China has an enormous naval and Coast Guard capability that is very difficult for the Philippines to match. They have a much smaller number of ships. Their ships are not as capable as the Chinese ships, and that is a significant challenge for the Philippines. They're trying to invest more, but they're not really there yet. And again, it also comes back to the question of what kind of support will the international community and its close allies like the United States provide. That really will be a significant factor if the Philippines wants to enforce its claims. And also keep in mind, we have this arbitration decision from 2016, which China did not participate in and doesn't recognize. So if you want to talk about international law, you could say, well, it's very nice that there are these forums and they issue arbitral awards. But if one side didn't participate in the process and ignores the result, we're really back to the use of force.
Yeah, and Ross, and finally, over $3 trillion worth in annual global trade passes through these waters. Do you think the world is underreacting to what is effectively a slow motion militarization of the South China Sea?
We do see more countries sailing through the waters. They say it's in support of keeping them open to international commerce. There was discussion about this issue in the newly released national security strategy by the Trump administration a little over a week ago as well. So the international community is certainly paying attention to this. Then it becomes a question of, are you just going to sail through there once a year, and referring to, say, some of the European countries, or are you going to have a more permanent presence, which will, of course, invite a Chinese reaction. But if you really do want to counter them, then you have to be there more than once or twice a year.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you. We now move on. We stay in the region, and Myanmar's military junta has denied killing any civilians in a recently conducted hospital strike, which, as per local reports, killed more than 30. A military jet bombed the General Hospital of Marayu in the Rakhine state of Myanmar on Wednesday earlier this week. According to a state-run media outlet, the people killed or injured in the strikes were not civilians, but only terrorists and their supporters. The United Nations has demanded an investigation into the incident, saying that the attack could be considered a potential war crime. Additionally, the WHO chief has said that several health workers and patients were killed in the hospital attack and that the building, along with its operating rooms, were severely damaged. Arakan Army, a ethnic minority separatist force active in the region, reported that 76 people were also wounded in the strike. Tens of thousands of people are fleeing rising floodwaters in western Washington as the Skagit River reaches record highs, putting levees at risk. Days of torrential rain have swelled rivers to record or near record levels as flooding has stranded families and rooftops, washed over bridges and ripped homes from their foundations. Burlington was placed under a full evacuation order, with people told to leave immediately and move to higher ground. National Guard troops and sheriff's deputies were going door to assist the evacuations. Some responders were seen paddling stranded Burlington residents to safety in inflatable river rafts through the muddy floodwaters. Abbotsford, a city in Canada bordering the United States, has also been severely injured by the flooding. Listen in to what a resident had to say on the issue.
Well, like coming down here and seeing all this water, it's horrible. And I know about all the people being evacuated, and it's just really sad to see. Just seeing all the houses affected, it was pretty jarring to see. Not to mention the water's freezing cold. I just wish Abbotsford was more prepared.
And that's a wrap for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.